So now that we covered explicit animations, let's dive into implicit animations. And implicit animations are all about using pre-built widgets offered by Flutter that can be used to add animations to certain areas of your app. And for that, attached you also find a link to the Flutter documentation to a page that lists some of the animated widgets offered by Flutter that can be used to add such implicit animations. You'll see an example for one such animated widgets over the next minutes, but you can also take a look at this list here to find more widgets that could be helpful to you. Now in this app here, I want to add an implicit animation in the meal details Dart file, so on the meal details screen. There we have this icon button in the app bar, which we use to mark a meal as a favorite or not. So in the end, this button here. And now I want to add a little animation to this button so that whenever we click this button and we change this icon, we also animate the icon to, for example, give it a spin and rotate it as it changes. And whilst we could add this functionality with an explicit animation with our own animation controller, it's even easier to add this kind of animation by using an implicit animation, so by using a pre-built widget offered by Flutter. And indeed, for many animations you might want to perform, pre-built widgets are often the better choice. So here for this meal details screen, for animating this icon here, whenever the favorite status changes, we can go to this icon parameter. So we really only want to go to the place that should be animated. I don't want to animate the entire button if it's really just the icon that I want to animate, because the event listener here can't really be animated, it's not visible. So I'm going to this icon here. And here, as a value for icon, instead of setting this icon here as a value, we can set animated switcher as a value. And that is a widget provided by Flutter, which allows us to animate the transition from one widget to another. So from this star icon to this star border icon, for example. By the way, I can't use animated switcher here instead of icon, because animated switcher in the end is a widget, and inside of this icon widget here, Flutter wants an icon data value. Icon, on the other hand, wants a widget, so therefore here I can use animated switcher. But how does animated switcher work now? Well, it has a couple of parameters that we can set. For example, the duration of the animation, but also the child. And the child in the end should be our icon here. So we can paste this in here, because that's the child which we want to animate. Now we also have to add a duration here, of course. And for the duration, you can create such a duration object, and it's up to you which duration you want to set. Here I'll set a duration of 300 milliseconds again, but you can of course play around with that value. Now with that, that's a good start, but you will see that if you save this and restart the app, and you then go to such a meal, nothing will change here. There is no animation of this icon. Because even though we set a duration and the widget that should be animated, we haven't given animated switcher any information regarding which animation it should play. What should it do with that child? Well, that's the part which we'll add now. Animated switcher also takes a so-called transition builder. And transition builder wants a function that receives a widget and an animation. So therefore here we can add such a function. And as mentioned, here we get a widget and an animation. So I'll name the widget child and the animation animation, though since this here is your function, these parameter names are also up to you. And these parameter values here will be provided by Flutter. That's really important. You don't need to create an animation manually here. Instead, the animated switcher will do this for you behind the scenes. It will create the animation and start the animation. And it will start the animation whenever the child changes. So it will automatically detect this and play the animation as the child updates. And that's why it's an implicit animation. You don't need to worry about creating or starting or stopping or configuring the animation. That will all be done for you. That being said, though, this function which you pass to Transition Builder also must return something which must be defined by you. It must return a widget, but it shouldn't return any kind of widget, but instead it should return one of these transition widgets, which I already mentioned earlier in this section, like fade transition or size transition, because these widgets, these transition widgets, then describe how you want to animate. So with animated switcher, we say that we want to animate whenever the child widget updates or changes. And in the transition builder, we now return how we want to animate. And here I'll return a rotation transition widget, which will rotate this child widget whenever it changes. So it will give it a spin. Now for that, it wants a turns value, and turns is not a number like 3, but instead an animation. Now thankfully here we get an animation automatically. So we can use this animation here. With that, we're almost done. But rotation transition also takes a child. And that in turn wants a widget. The widget that will receive this rotation animation. And that should be this child here, which in the end is this child. And yeah, I know, that's a lot of children. But in the end, it's this child here, which we set on animated switcher, which will control when this animation switcher activates and plays its transition. It's also this child which is provided by animated switcher to this transition builder through this first argument here. So this child here is whatever you set as a child here. And it's now this child which I want to set as a child for rotation transition so that the rotation animation is played on this child, so on this child in the end. So that's how all these children here are working together.